My name is Laurence Kotlikoff. I'm delighted to speak with you today. I want to talk to you today about personal financial planning, but I want to do so in the context of the broader global economic situation. That includes how the U.S. is doing, how the rest of the world is doing, and also how the Taiwanese economy is doing. So let me start there, and then I'll move on to talking about economics-based financial planning, significant productivity growth or output per capita growth in the last couple of years. There's been good growth, excellent growth really over the years in Taiwan, but there's been some years where things have not done so well, certainly during COVID. But in the last couple of years, we've seen remarkably high per capita GDP growth rates. The growth rate right now is looking to go above 7%, perhaps even 8% for 2026. Depends on how things occur or rise in the global economy. But I want to imagine that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked by the Iranians for the next 4 years. The price of oil would go up, as I said, and then gradually come down based on alternative ways of exporting oil and also production arising in other parts of the world. But what would happen during this period? Well, the prediction is that the U.S. would experience a recession, a significant recession. Our GDP might drop by as much as 3% rather than growing it by 2% this year. What about Taiwan? Well, you could experience, rather than a 7% growth in GDP, your GDP might decline by 3 to 5%. And the world could also experience a significant recession. And then after that drop in GDP, the growth rates of the global and the US and Taiwanese economies would slow. And we would end up after 3 years with US GDP probably about 5% lower than it would otherwise be. World GDP about 7% lower. Taiwanese GDP also probably about 7% lower. So this is a major concern, what will happen with Iran. The issue for the U.S., even if the war ends, is that the U.S. is not doing that well economically. The MAGA, Make America Great Again movement has really not succeeded in making America great again, at least so far in the first roughly year and a half of the Trump administration. And if you look at annual inflation, if you take the recent monthly inflation rates and you project them forward for the next 12 months, rather than looking backwards, but you look forward and say, what if that monthly rate were to continue for the next 12 months? Well, we're talking about a 9 to 11% annual inflation rate. That's higher than we saw under President Biden. The max there was about 8% per year. Well, what about another issue, which is U.S. Fiscal policy? The GDP ratio in the U.S., the official debt to GDP, is rising. It was declining under Biden for a while because we were running inflation and we were watering down, we were devaluing the debt. That's the way inflation erodes the debt to GDP ratio. Last year, foreigners invested about 3 times more in the U.S. than did Americans. So our country is increasingly being owned by foreigners because they're investing when Americans are not investing, because we're not saving. We're taking the wherewithal of young people to save their wages and handing them in the form of taxes or borrowing from them and giving the proceeds to older people in effect who are spending the proceeds. They're not saving that money, as happens in Taiwan, to give to their kids. That's not going on in the US. Taiwan probably, I think, has a saving rate, it appears to be around 30%. Ours is around 1.5%. That's miles different. So, but on the other hand, Taiwan has some major macro problems. Like the US, you have a highly underfunded state pension system. Like the US, you have a high official debt to GDP ratio. You have a very low fertility rate, the lowest in the world right now, and you need a fertility rate of 2.1 to maintain the population at a constant level. So your country needs to do this long-term fiscal gap accounting to see where you are when you take everything into account. And also in the process, I want to talk more fundamentally about retirement planning and what economics has to say in general about that for everybody, including Taiwanese households. And the idea of economics planning is that you try and keep your living standards smooth. You try and figure out safe ways to raise your living standard. You try and think about ways like buying life insurance and investing carefully in a diversified manner if you're investing in the marketplace to protect your living standard. And then, again, all of these things are involved with sustaining your living standard right up to your maximum age of life. So you need to plan to live to your maximum age of life, not to your expected age of life, because you might do that. So the first thing to do is really safety first planning, and to think about investing in a safe way, not investing in the stock in things that are risky. So let's think about planning to begin with, where you know for sure that you're going to get a safe rate of return. And this is one way to do that. And you're planning here, again, to live to your maximum, not your expected age of life, because you can't count on dying on time. You can't, you have to focus on your entire potential lifespan. And you need to do lifetime budgeting, as I was referencing, to make sure that you can maintain your living standard for all your family members right up to your max, assuming everybody lives as long as possible. The dealing with this concern about dying very late in life is important because that's longevity risk. It may seem like a great thing to keep living and living and living right up to your maximum, but financially speaking, it's a catastrophic risk because you have to keep paying for yourself. So you can't, again, just to say it one more time, you can't count on dying on time. You can't focus on your life expectancy. Doing so is like assuming your house will have the average size fire if your house catches fire. And you can't count on that. You want to buy catastrophic homeowners insurance. So in the worst case scenario, you'll be covered. Here, the worst case scenario, financially speaking, is you live to 100. That's the maximum age of life for most Taiwanese, I believe. Now, economics says that realizes that the probability of living that long is very low. So what it says is that you can take a reasonable gamble and spend more when you're young and less when you're old. Plan to spend more when you're young and less when you're old in order to take advantage of the fact that the probability is very low that you will live that long, but you don't truncate your planning horizon. That's the proper way to think about to deal with longevity risk. Spend a little bit more when you're young, and knowing that you'll spend less when you're old. And of course, when you're old, you're not going to be taking a lot of trips and going to fancy restaurants. You'll be taking it slow and easy. So the lifetime budgeting is you calculate your net lifetime resources. Those are the present value of all your resources, your net wealth, plus the present value of your labor income, plus your your pension income and present value, all your resources. You get the present value, the value in the present of those resources. You subtract off the present value of your your fixed spending on housing, taxes, bequests, support of parents, healthcare, etc. What's left is your discretionary spending budget. And then the idea is to figure out how much can you spend every year on discretionary spending, such that when you divide by the number of people that are in the household that will be there, the living standard per person will stay the same or gradually decline through time. That's called consumption smoothing. That's how you actually go about doing consumption smoothing, making this calculation. And once you have that framework set up, it's very easy to figure out when to retire, because you have a mechanism for figuring out the cost of retiring, for pricing out retiring at different ages. If I retire 3 years later than I'm thinking about retiring, well, then I get to spend more on a sustainable basis. So the price of working for another 3 years, so there's a cost to that in terms of I'd like to take it easy, but there's a benefit, which is that I get to spend more, not just in retirement, but even today, because I don't need to save as much. Another way to look at this is if I retire 3 years earlier than that date, I have to spend less. So you get to figure out the price of retiring early with this calculus, with this type of calculation. That's part of economics-based planning. Now, what if you decide that you don't want to invest just in tips, that you want to, or something equivalently safe in Taiwan, but you want to invest some money in the stock market, whether it's the Taiwanese market or the European market or the Hong Kong market or the US market? Well, there's a way to go about this that doesn't necessarily involve downside living standard risk, and it's called upside investing. So the idea of upside investing is that you put some money in the market, but you leave it there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and you don't spend out of that money until you have converted that, maybe gradually, starting over maybe 10 years when you're 65 to 75, for example. You take a tenth out of your stocks and you buy tips. And then the next year you take a ninth out of whatever your stocks are worth and you buy tips. And then you take an eighth out the next year. So gradually over 10 years, you're getting out entirely out of the market. And each time you're buying more of these safe assets. And the rule of upside investing is that you only spend out of safe assets. Let me talk a bit about the TISA, Taiwan's Individual Savings Account Initiative. You don't have a saving problem in Taiwan, neither at the household nor, I believe, at the national level, like we do in the US. And the Taiwanese government has implemented TISA to improve the investment opportunities for you, and that's a great thing. Doing the economics-based planning, the safety-first planning to begin with, costing out what it means to retire early, how much that really costs. And then you want to also be thinking about, should I take any risk whatsoever in terms of risky investing? If I am, I want to be thinking about upside investing first, and then I want to think about full risk investing and decide what you want to do. And then the government of Taiwan needs to think about reforming its pension system in a way that will make sure that the economy doesn't get into the kind of trouble the U.S. economy is in because of our fiscal system being bankrupt. So Taiwan should consider freezing its underfunded pension plans. So paying off what is owed, paying off the accrued benefits, compelling households to contribute to the TISA system, and then in that process, transiting to a modern, fully funded pension system. So there is a way to have a reform of your pension system that gets you closer to a Danish-type funded system or a Singapore-type funded system or a Norwegian-type system. It's been a great honor to speak to you today, so I want to thank you for listening to me. Thank you.